Nobody expected America to reach this breaking point. Families who won't speak to each other anymore. Friends who became enemies over politics. Churches split right down the middle. And at the center of it all, one name that triggers instant reactions in any conversation. Donald Trump. Loved by millions. Hated by just as many. No leader in recent American history has generated this much passion and this much fury at the same time. This content has no political or partisan intention, but rather a spiritual and reflective one. But what few people know is that this storm was already seen decades before it began. Someone saw this moment coming. Someone warned about it. And almost nobody wanted to believe it. Maybe the question isn't who leads us, but who we've become while choosing our leaders. Think for a moment. When was the last time you saw an American election end in peace? When was the last time the loser accepted defeat without accusations of fraud, without violent protests, without hatred in the streets? The uncomfortable truth is that something changed profoundly in the soul of this nation. And that change didn't start with an election. It started with a spiritual fracture that had been opening for a long time, silently, like an invisible crack in the foundation of a house. January 2021. The entire world watched in shock as the capital of the United States was invaded. Furious demonstrators entered the Capitol, the greatest symbol of American democracy. Glass shattered. People screamed. Lawmakers hid under tables with real fear of being lynched. It was an unthinkable scene, impossible to imagine on American soil. And yet, it happened. The impact was global. The images circled the world. And the question echoed across every continent. How did America, beacon of democracy, reach this point? But that's not the most disturbing part. What really sends chills down your spine is knowing that someone had already described this type of moral collapse decades earlier. Someone who saw the storm coming long before the first clouds appeared on the horizon. Someone who warned about a nation that would divide itself not through external war, but through internal hatred. A voice that was ignored, ridiculed, and then forgotten, until reality started imitating her words with a precision that defies any rational explanation. If you believe in the power of God and recognize Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, I ask you to leave your like right now and subscribe here to the Living Hope channel. This simple action strengthens our community and helps carry this message to more people who need to hear it. Together, we can spread light in the midst of darkness. May God pour out abundant blessings upon you and your family, protecting your home and guiding your steps. Now let me ask you something sincere. Do you believe there are people capable of seeing beyond the veil of time? I'm not talking about charlatans or street fortune tellers who make vague predictions to earn money. I'm talking about something much deeper and much more disturbing. About a spiritual gift that, throughout history, manifested itself in figures who caused both admiration and fear. Prophets who spoke truths that nobody wanted to hear. Messengers who were stoned for bringing uncomfortable warnings. And among these historical figures, one stood out in a way impossible to ignore in the 20th century. Her name was Jeane Dixon, and for decades, her words were forgotten, buried in old books, ignored by the media and academia, until reality started imitating them with frightening precision, until events that seemed impossible began happening exactly as she had described. And then, people started asking themselves, how did she know? Where did this knowledge come from? Dixon didn't seek fame. She didn't sell empty hopes or promises of prosperity. She was a woman of deep faith, a devout Catholic, who claimed to receive her visions directly from God during moments of intense prayer and spiritual meditation. Her predictions weren't vague like newspaper horoscopes. They were specific, dated, named, detailed to the point of causing discomfort. In the middle of the 1950s, when nobody imagined such a tragedy, she said publicly in a national magazine that a young blue-eyed president would be assassinated in office. Years later, Kennedy fell in Dallas under shots that shocked the world. The country stopped. Millions cried. And Dixon's words returned to the surface like a prophetic ghost that nobody could explain. She also saw the death of Marilyn Monroe before it happened. She described a bright star surrounded by sadness who would die in a mysterious and tragic way. When Monroe was found dead under murky circumstances, many remembered Dixon's warning. She alerted about a physical attack on Pope Paul VI, and weeks later a man actually tried to stab him during an international trip. Her visions touched presidents, movie stars, religious leaders, world events. But that wasn't what made her different from other psychics of that era. What made Jeane Dixon truly unique was the spiritual weight of her messages. She didn't just speak about isolated events. She spoke about deep moral consequences, about invisible battles between light and darkness, about a nation that was consciously walking toward a spiritual abyss without realizing the gravity of what it was doing. Her words carried a tone of urgency, almost of desperation, as if she were trying to wake up a people who slept while the house caught fire. Prophecies don't exist to predict dates as if they were mystical calendars. They exist to reveal paths, to show directions, to warn about consequences. And Jeane Dixon saw paths that led to darkness, saw collective choices that would produce bitter fruits. She lived in Washington, close to the heart of American political power. She circulated among the elite. She attended events where senators, ambassadors, and influential figures were present. She received letters coming directly from the White House. Presidential advisors sought her out in secret, discreetly, embarrassed to publicly admit that they consulted a prophetess. Richard Nixon, known for being deeply superstitious and emotionally unstable, would have consulted her predictions before making critical government decisions. Dixon personally warned that he would face a devastating fall, an unprecedented public humiliation. And Watergate came like a political earthquake that ripped him from power and forced him to resign in disgrace. Nixon never publicly admitted that he consulted her, but close sources confirm that he took her words very seriously. But there was one specific vision of Jeane Dixon that remained hidden for a long time, a vision that few had the courage to speak about openly, that was deliberately omitted from interviews and suppressed in religious and political circles. She described the future arrival of a magnetic, charismatic leader coming from outside the traditional political system, a man of great wealth, of impressive boldness, of words sharp as razors. He wouldn't speak like traditional politicians, full of roundabout ways and diplomatic language. He wouldn't follow established rules. He would break protocols, and he would awaken extreme and violent emotions in the population. Blind and fanatical love on one side, deep and visceral hatred on the other. No middle ground. Dixon wrote in her personal diaries that this man would emerge, not through tradition, but through disruption. That the people would choose him not for what he represented from the past, but for the seductive promise to completely destroy what existed, and that his rise to power would mark the definitive beginning of a brutal spiritual war for the soul of America. A war that wouldn't be fought with physical weapons, but with words, lies, manipulation, and deep emotional division. When Donald Trump descended the golden escalator at Trump Tower in 2015 to announce his presidential candidacy, practically nobody took it seriously. The media laughed. Political analysts mocked. Even members of the Republican Party itself considered him a joke, an entertainment show that would soon disappear. But he didn't disappear. He grew. His words resonated with millions of frustrated Americans, tired, full of anger against the system. And he won against all odds. And when he won, the country exploded in fanatical passion and destructive fury. Was Jeane Dixon speaking specifically about Donald Trump decades before he entered politics? Many prophecy scholars firmly believe yes. Others argue that the prophecy is broader and symbolic, that it speaks of a spirit of division, not necessarily one single man. But the parallels are so specific that it becomes impossible to ignore them completely. Trump came from an extremely wealthy family. He defied all established political conventions. He spoke without filters, without fear of offending, without apologizing. He repeatedly promised to break the corrupt Washington system. And he divided the American nation like no other modern political leader managed to do. Perhaps the most important thing here isn't to determine whether the prophecy refers to Trump specifically as an individual. Perhaps the most important thing is to deeply understand what it reveals about ourselves as a society, about our collective choices, about our lost values, about our hunger for leaders who speak our language of anger instead of calling us to something greater. Dixon repeatedly warned that this divisive leader would actually be a spiritual test for the entire nation, a giant mirror placed before the American people, and the reflection would be painful, revealing, impossible to ignore. She saw in her visions violent protests taking over the streets, deep division cutting through families like a sword, widespread social chaos, families literally broken because of different political positions, churches completely silenced by fear or, even worse, full of political rage instead of Christian love. She predicted a dark time when truth would be so completely distorted, manipulated, and fragmented that nobody would know what to believe anymore. That right and wrong would completely lose their clear moral outlines. That fear would totally replace faith in people's hearts. That neighbors would look at each other with suspicion. That brothers would become enemies. And that the very idea of objective truth would be ridiculed and destroyed. Now look around with honesty. Isn't this exactly what we're living through right now? 2020 brought massive protests that literally set entire cities on fire. 2021 brought the unimaginable invasion of the Capitol. Elections no longer unite the nation around a common purpose. They destroy relationships, divide communities, create permanent hatred. People no longer debate ideas in a civilized manner. They attack with fury, cancel, destroy reputations, wish evil upon each other. And in the middle of all this, the question that nobody really wants to ask out loud: how did we get here? How did the most powerful nation in the world, founded on Christian and democratic principles, reach this point of total fragmentation? The answer may lie precisely in the ignored warnings of people like Jeane Dixon.
But Dixon's prophetic vision doesn't simply end with chaos and destruction. It ends with a collective choice that can still be made. She wrote extensively about a great fall that would come for this figure she called in some texts the chosen disruptor. A collapse that wouldn't happen through external violence, assassination, or military coup, but through internal weight, through accumulated consequences, through progressive spiritual isolation. The leader she saw in her visions would reach the absolute height of political power, surrounded by immense crowds who screamed his name with religious fervor. But then, slowly and inexorably, would come the devastating isolation, the betrayals coming from within his own circle, the progressive abandonment by allies who before swore eternal loyalty. Those who lifted him to power with so much enthusiasm would simply let him fall when it was no longer convenient to support him, and he would be completely alone at the top, looking around, asking out loud where everyone went, why they abandoned him. This specific and dark part of the prophecy remained hidden for many years, possibly decades. Some researchers claim that Jeane Dixon herself had genuine fear of divulging it publicly. Others firmly believe it was intentionally suppressed by powerful people who had an interest in keeping these words away from public knowledge. But now, at this moment in history, it has resurfaced with full force. And many people are seriously asking themselves, are we already seeing this part of the prophecy happening before our eyes? Or is it still to come in the near future? Jeane Dixon died in 1997, taking with her many secrets and visions she never fully shared. She never saw Donald Trump enter politics. She never saw the rise of social media that amplifies divisions. She never saw the extreme and toxic polarization that characterizes our current days. But her words seem written specifically for this historical moment we're living through. And perhaps that's the true divine purpose of an authentic prophecy. Not simply to predict future events as entertainment, but to spiritually prepare people's hearts for choices that can still be made. Dixon warned vehemently that the spirit of division, hatred, and deceit wouldn't magically disappear with the physical exit of one man from power. That this spirit would remain active and strong, continuously feeding anger, distrust, and fear for many subsequent years. And that only a genuine collective return to absolute truth, to sincere humility, and to God could effectively silence it and bring true healing to the wounded nation. Today, at this exact moment, in small and large churches scattered throughout the country, ordinary people are returning to these ancient prophetic words with renewed interest and deep seriousness, not to idolize a deceased prophetess or create a cult around her visions, but to try to honestly understand what we lost as a nation over the decades, which values we abandoned, which spiritual foundations we let crumble, and what we can still potentially recover if we make the right choices now. Because in the end, when the dust settles and history is written, perhaps the most important prophecy isn't really about who will politically lead the nation, but about who we will become as a people while we choose to follow certain paths. About what kind of society we're building with our words, our choices, our hatred, or our love. If this video touched something deep in you, if it made you think or reflect differently, leave your like now and subscribe to the Living Hope channel. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it. May God illuminate your path and protect your family.